Good morning. It's Pastor Jonathan with Robertsdale UMC. Thank you for joining me for today's Daily Devo, day 31 of our 31-day challenge. Believe it or not, we are finally at the end of the 31 chapters of Proverbs. Today is chapter 31, and I hope that you have been enjoying this journey. I hope that you've learned some things. And today we're going to look at a famous chapter of Proverbs, the very last chapter, because it's kind of set apart from the rest of the book. In the sense that it really talks about a godly woman. But today, I want to share something a little different about the chapter that may illuminate the fact that it is very relevantly connected to the whole book of Proverbs, and really, in a sense, kind of sums up the whole book. But first, I want to ask your prayers for some people in our church. If you're a member of our church and you received the e-news prayer list yesterday, you know that our secretary and her husband have a doctor's appointment today because he was discovered to have a blockage. So please pray for them as they are obviously very concerned about this unexpected news they received yesterday. We have a few other church members that are having surgery today, another one tomorrow, another one Friday. So just a lot of people in our church, even leaders, some staff going through medical trials right now. And of course, COVID just complicates everything. We're all struggling, and there's all kinds of dynamics that we haven't had to deal with before. So please lift these in prayer, and thank you so much for doing so. We are also praying for you, no matter who you are, whether you're a member of our church or someone who's connected with us during this season, perhaps through the online things that we've been offering. We are praying for you, and we are praying for each other, and I think it's important that you know that. Last night, I was actually reading some things that were popping up on my feed, and I just happened upon this article about a movie. I like movies, and I was intrigued. It was actually a movie I had not seen, but it talked about how the movie was actually changed as a result of a conversation with the main actor, because the lead role read the script and said, we can't do the movie like this. It has a sad ending. One of the main characters dies in the end. And they said, well, yeah, that's the story. And he said, no, that's not right. He said, unpleasantness happens in real life. Now, this is a movie. And when people come to see this movie, they don't want to walk away with this ending. And they argued about it for a while. And finally, he said, either the character doesn't die or I walk. I'm out of here. And they changed the ending of the movie. They actually let the character live because the lead actor was so insistent upon that happening. And his argument was, when we go watch a movie, we want to leave feeling good. When the credits roll, we want to feel great. We don't want to experience the same unpleasant emotions that life deals with us. And I share that today because sometimes I think we approach the Bible the same way. Life deals us a lot of unpleasantness. And it is true that the Bible is a book of hope. Some have called the Bible a love story from God to us. And in a lot of ways, it very much is. It is the salvation story of God's activity to redeem humankind, and the ending is incredible if you've never read it. And it gives us hope because we know where we're going. Yet at the same time, the Bible is not just a book filled with pleasantries. It is not just a book of fairy tales and feel-good stories. It is a real and raw chronicle of God's activity among a very depraved human race. And the good news about that is it's real life. The Bible is not a movie. It's filled with real people dealing with real issues and really high highs and really low lows, just like we deal with in life. And that's one reason I love it. Because it is a book that is relevant to me and all of the unpleasantness that I experience in life. And I find my story in the story of God, in the story of Scripture, and that is why I can receive the hope that it has to offer. Because if it's a hope-filled book that's not realistic, that really has no intersection with real life, then what kind of hope is that? But if it can be filled with the same kind of unpleasantness we can experience in life and still have this hope that is so great it is almost unbelievable, and we can only hope for it in faith, that's a kind of hope that I can receive and get behind. So I share all that to say, I don't know what this 31-day journey has been like for you. But if you're like me, there have been days that you just kind of wanted to set Proverbs aside and say, I'm not sure this chapter is the chapter I want to read today. And I know that it's important to read the whole book and see how it's all connected and all related. And certainly themes that appear more often than others are there for importance and for emphasis. But I just don't want to read another chapter about an adulterous woman or why we should watch our mouth and our language and that kind of thing. I need something more pleasant. And that's a challenge to me as I read Scripture to say, okay, Lord, if I'm reading this, why? Why do you want me to know this? And the important tie-in with all of that is that in case you forgot, because this has been a long journey, we've been at this a month, there are many themes in the book of Proverbs, but there are specifically two characters that we learn about and that we run into and that we're admonished to interact with in certain ways. And one is Lady Folly, and the other is Lady Wisdom. Lady Folly is enticing. She's a party, and we are drawn to her, and we want to enjoy her company. But Proverbs describes in great detail what happens when we do so and why that leads to our demise. On the other hand, Lady Wisdom is the source of life and goodness and blessing. And when we possess wisdom, we are like a tree planted by the river of life, ever green, ever living, right? So this is why Proverbs 31 is important, because when we read back over this, it's easy to read chapter 31, and I'm going to let you read it on your own. I'm not going to read all of chapter 31 because this video is already a few minutes in, and I've only got a few minutes left, and I want you to read this on your own and see what sticks out to you. But one thing that I saw in this reading of the book of Proverbs for the first time ever is that this chapter is not just about a godly woman and her character traits. Listen to verse 10, excuse me. A wife of noble character who can find. Most people, if they've ever heard any excerpt from Proverbs 31, that's the verse they've heard. A wife of noble character who can find. She is worth far more than rubies. She's worth far more than rubies. Right there, a light bulb should go off if we've been reading the book of Proverbs, because who in the book of Proverbs has been said multiple times to be worth more than gold, more precious than silver, more precious than rubies? Think Proverbs chapter 3, verse 15, wisdom. Wisdom is more precious than rubies. So when it's listing out Proverbs 31, this is actually wisdom writings from a queen mother to her son, King Lemuel. Now, I don't know who those people actually are, but I know that this is a queen mother's wisdom passed down to her son, the king, just in the same way that Solomon, the king, was passing down wisdom throughout this book to his sons, that they might be people of character and rule well and seek a blessed life in union with God and receiving the wisdom from him. And as she lists out the character traits of a godly woman, part of what we're also supposed to read in this is what Lady Wisdom looks like manifest. This is what she looks like if she were to live a life in the times that these words were written. These are the kinds of things that she would do. These are the kinds of traits she would possess. She would be diligent. She would always be thinking about her family and how to provide for them, how to make a good life for them. She would be sharp and attentive. She would be honorable and not shameful. She would actually increase the reputation of her household. All of these things are the way that wisdom as a lady would be lived out in her character. And I want to zoom in on that phrase, noble character, because that's the title of today's Daily Devo. Some translations also say a woman of valor. A woman of valor. A noble character, a person of valor. And that tells us that this is a life that in this chapter is described of what a female life would look like, specifically a wife and a mother, but that can be applied to anyone. And in that way, even men can read this. And honestly, do you know who this chapter was written for? It wasn't written for women. It was written for men. Consider the original audience. The queen mother is writing to her son, the king. And so she's writing primarily to a male audience. So if you read this chapter and you say, well, this is just for women, I'm going to skip that chapter and just go on to my next book of the Bible or whatever, remember that the male audience is the primary audience for which this chapter is written. In fact, I've even heard that in Jewish culture, it is the men who have to memorize this chapter. It is the men who have to look for these traits and celebrate the godly women in their life, and specifically seek to have a relationship with Lady Wisdom and receive God's wisdom, because as we've talked about throughout this whole journey, there's a big difference between man's wisdom and God's wisdom. Wisdom is not just wisdom. There's a way that seems right to a man, but its end leads to destruction. The only true knowledge and understanding and wisdom comes from the Lord. And one of the greatest traits that it talks about of this female character in Proverbs 31 is that she fears the Lord. All these other attributes, all of these wonderful behaviors that are listed out here as she's characterized are a result of one thing, that she fears the Lord. That's the invitation. That's the challenge for us too. And that's the challenge of this whole 31-day journey. Proverbs began this way and it ends this way. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. So, no matter what your aims are, no matter what your goals are and desires are, make your primary aim to fear the Lord. Make your primary desire to receive wisdom from Him, His kind of wisdom, to be a person of valor, to be a person of noble character, and to build your life on the rock that is God. This is Pastor Jonathan with Robertsdale UMC. Thank you for joining me on this 31-day journey. If there is something specific about today or even the whole series of the last 31 days that impacted you, that jumped out especially to you, maybe one thing that really changed your life most or was an insight in your relationship with God or your faith, would you share that in the comments so we can all be edified? When God gives us things, it's not just for us to hold on to. He gives us things so that we can share and build up others. So would you do that? I would love to know. I would love to hear from you, and I would love to have my faith strengthened and my knowledge grown by how the Lord is speaking to you. God bless you today. Grace and peace.